Welcome to the October 7th, 2025 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo, and I'm the host of the livestream today. And if you have not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can ask questions in the live chat field or simply send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, if you could indicate which version of Cubase you're running, so if it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, which version number, so if it's 12, 13, or 14, and also which operating system, that information is helpful. We will go through all the questions chronologically as asked, and I may be behind what would be like real-time responses to questions depending on the number of questions, but we will go through all the questions chronologically as asked. So if we could avoid, if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could avoid asking the same question repeatedly, that would be appreciated. We also should have an index of all the topics covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field several hours after the live stream ends. I'll take a quick dinner break and work on the live stream tonight, and that will have timestamps so you can navigate to particular questions. And if you wanted to search for particular questions in advance, you could go to cubaseindex.com. We want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating that wonderful site. We have two people that serve as moderators, Jazz Dude and Agent K. So we want to give special thanks to them. They're not Steinberg employees. They do it out of the goodness of their hearts to make it a better community experience. Also, we want to give a special thanks to Jazz Dude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. It's a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So we'll give a special extra kudos to him and how much we appreciate everything he does for the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I primarily focus on Steinberg products. And I'm presenting from outside in the United States, from outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you are from. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. All right, so we see Tim K joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. Cat Buddy is waving a paw hello to other pets that are nearby, and he's ready to learn. We have Stefan joining from Sweden. We see Michael Marshall from Somerset, UK. All right, we have Greg Malik who says, Aloha. Does anyone know how to have the VST instrument folders automatically collapsed when you click on VST instruments? No pressing of the little minus sign. So I assume it's going to be maybe in the media zone. So when I just did this, so let's say I just switched here. Mine were collapsed. Let's say if I expand, and let's go collapse. I will open up, let's say, a new project, and we'll see if it is collapsed by default. So we'll go to our VST instruments, and looks like it is, one of them will be expanded. I don't know a way of automatically collapsing to have them all collapsed on start. I think the intention is that all of your instruments are available to you so that you could just simply scroll up and down to load a particular instrument. So you could just come right over here without having to open up multiple, without having to say, okay, I want to get a synth. And if you have different folder structures, to come over here and open that up. But let me know, Greg, if this is the area that you're talking to, as opposed to, let's say if I go to add an instrument track. So let's say if we want to add an instrument track, if it's going to be in here. And I think that, again, the intention is that everything, so that you don't have to go and click in a particular folder to select a particular instrument, that when you come over here, that all the instruments will be available with one click, as opposed to kind of hunting and pecking with your mouse for 2 or 3 mouse clicks to search for instruments that are available. And, you know, one of the things that you could also do is just kind of probably come right over here and just type in. So let's say, okay, I'm looking for pad shop. You know, it looks like that is a default. So that when we go to a particular instrument, if we want it to just come over here. So let's say if we go to our instrument, let's say retro log, that we could just have that particular instrument open just from a search command. So if you could let me know if it's for the right zone MediaBay or just when adding an instrument track that you run into it. But I think, you know, the intention is that they're all available and accessible to use without having to open up folders after folders to have access to particular instruments. All right, we have Richard Willis checking in from Chepstow in Wales, United Kingdom. Thanks for joining us, being online with us. All right, we have Jan from Cubase Index saying hello to Jazz Dude, Agent K, and the Cubase family. He's sending greetings from Stockholm. All right, we have Alexander Plasko joining from Connecticut. Always wonderful to see Jazz Dude on. All right, we see Lawrence Koch checking in from Rhode Island at Barn Door Recording. Great to see you on, Lawrence. All right, Unicorn Production just says, hi, is Cubase better than Logic on Mac performance-wise? So I don't have a copy of Logic, but what I've seen on a number of YouTube videos, it seems like, you know, the Apple platform to Mac OS hardware has two different types of processing cores. So you have a performance core and efficiency cores. So Cubase will utilize, you know, both of the performance and the efficiency cores so that you're kind of utilizing all of the horsepower that your system. I've seen videos in the past. I'm not sure if it's changed because I don't have a Logic license. I have no need for one. But that Logic wasn't utilizing the efficiency cores. So, you know, there's been like, you know, different tests as new generations. There's one guy that, you know, goes through and tests which programs are utilizing both the efficiency and performance cores. And the last ones that I've seen, and it may not be current, was that, you know, I don't think that Logic, the last round that I saw, was still supporting the efficiency cores. So it's not utilizing a lot of the cores that are on a computer, but you could confirm elsewhere, but Cubase does. All right, so we have Soren checking in from Sweden, Uno Memento checking in from Finland. Great to see you both on. Michael Teams, always wonderful to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas, saying hello to the Cubase Nation. All right, we see Vince is Fly V joining from Winnipeg, California. All right, we see Ted Springman checking in from Sherman Oaks, I believe, in the Los Angeles area. And Soren has received one gallon of strawberry ice cream from Michael Teams. Richard Will says, hi, thanks guys for your hard work and dedication. So you're welcome. We're just great to have people on. We have Unicorn Productions sending greetings from Ukraine. Thanks for joining us. We hope you're safe. All right, John Costigan is sending greetings to fellow Cubasoids from Chile, Wisconsin. And John's based in Kenosha, just right north of the Illinois border, south of Milwaukee. All right, Jazz Dude has received 1 gallon of Texas fresh blackberry ice cream. And we see Michael Teams just saying thanks for the great Discord and your moderation here. I'll second that. All right, so we see from Jan, Cubase Index says Cubase Index has been updated and maintained 999 times since March 2020, with this session marking the 1000th Cubase Index. Contains all Greg's 41,000 plus searchable with one mouse click. Jan, thank you so much for creating that site. All right, Richard Willis just asked, I've been working on a project for weeks, went to open the project the other day and a message popped up, real-time algorithm has been deactivated because pitch or stretch factor lies outside. Let's see if it's lies outside the current preset. My question is, I can save this project, but how can I prevent this from happening again? So a lot of times with particular, when you get that message, like the real time, so it could be like if you've done offline processes on particular files. So like, let's say if you come over and say, okay, I've applied a plugin, or let's say if I have this particular file open here, like I've done offline processing. So let's say if I go to audio and I say, okay, I want to run this through a mod machine delay, and I'm doing, and you may run into this more if we were doing offline pitch shifting. So let's say if we go to processes, and if we come over here to pitch shift, so there can be different algorithms that are applied here. So, it could be that you may just have to, if you've done this, is maybe, and if you've done, like, these algorithms can do, sometimes they may do like an octave, sometimes they may do 11 semitones, sometimes they may do 2 octaves, depending upon the algorithm. But if you're doing like offline time stretching, you may run into that as well. Or if we have a track that's in musical mode, so if I wanted to, again, come over, let's say if I come over to my direct offline processing for that particular file, if you have things that are in musical mode and you're going to like an extreme time stretch with like, let's say you're going to like 4 beats a minute from 160 beats a minute, you may get a message depending on the algorithm. So if you kind of have an idea, like if you're doing like real-time warping where like you're changing the tempo on the fly, you could try to try a different algorithm. So if you're using like the efficient, the elastic efficient, maybe try the pro algorithms, but I would kind of look in one of the time stretch algorithms for that. All right, so great to see Lunrik back. Says, hi Greg, how do I quickly humanize parameters like velocity, timing, note duration in a MIDI file? Is it possible to use shortcuts? Okay, so let's come over and we'll do just kind of a generic sounding drum pattern here. All right, let me just check my studio setup here real quick. Okay, so if it's going to be like MIDI based stuff, probably one of the easier ways to do it is if you come over, let's say in the inspector, you'll see a MIDI modifiers. And once we have this kind of set up, we could see like 2 different random targets. So we could say, okay, I want to randomize, what do I want? Let's say the position. And I want it to be, let's say, 10, like 15 up, 15 back. So, and this will kind of change that particular. I'm just going to. So we could adjust kind of the timing, and let's say if we want to adjust our velocity of this, you know, I could just come over here, let's set a random target 2, and we'll say, okay, let's just go to velocity. So say I want to go 30 up. So if you listen to the hi-hat here, so I'll just play the hi-hat by itself here. So we could just come right over there and just randomize the velocity. So if I wanted to come over here, let's just set our velocity to normal in our position. Now we could also just come over, let's say if we wanted to also, there's like some great velocity variation stuff that you could do in the MIDI editor. So let's say I'll take just a couple of bars here. Let's put in all right, so if we wanted to also come over here, we could have velocity variance. So if you wanted to just be able to kind of, you could have kind of the velocity be the same, but like, and then there's also play probability. So you could say, okay, like this note, I want to play back, you know, 100% of the times, like these notes, and these notes we could vary, will follow by notes that are going to play a lot. So these notes will probably always play. These will play like 30% of the time, 40% of the time. So these might still play. Let's say they'll play 50% of the time here. So every time it will just kind of randomly based on the play variations. Now we could also do stuff in the logical editor. So let's say, okay, I want all these to play back. Another method be just kind of come over here to the logical editor and say, okay, I want to transform type is equal to note, and we could specify a specific pitch if we wanted to just come over here and say subtype. They just have one pitch here, and then what we want to do is say position, and we will say, okay, we're going to set to relative random values, and here we can say like minus 30. So now when we come over here, we can see that everything is perfectly on the grid. And I'll adjust my velocity variance here. Let me just adjust this up so we're hearing kind of the same. So now if we look at our events here, we can see that they're perfectly on the grid. But if I just wanted to come over here, we could just kind of randomize the position of the notes. So I'll just do it to all notes here. So now we could randomize the position, and if we also wanted to randomize the velocity. So we can say, okay, I want to take those notes and we want to go to velocity, and we could set to relative random, or we could say random values between 80 and 127. All right, so now when we go back, I could just come over here. So if we look at our notes, let's say our notes are completely fixed, I can now just randomize their velocity as well as their position if you wanted to. So several different approaches to kind of randomizing MIDI, make it a bit more human. All right, so we see Greg Malik, who asked about the VST instrument, says, yes, Greg, to the right of the VST instrument was the area. It was nicely organized instrument folders, but pressing the minus key, the minus icon isn't the worst. So let me just see if there's a... Let's see if there's maybe a key command for this. I don't think it's a preference. So under, let's see if this, this might be for the project window, but let me just see. Yeah, so I think, and I think the design intention is that, instead of having to always open, to have it open and available without having to open it every single time. But thanks for the clarification, Greg. I hope you're doing well in Hawaii. All right, we see that Uno Memento has the flu, so we hope you recover well. And you see Michael Teams is granted 1 gallon of rum raisin ice cream to help. All right, great to see Tim Weinheimer on from Mission Viejo, California. Okay, reading through comments. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped on me. All right, we see Cubase Index. This is Jan's giving kudos to Jazz Dude for the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord and his moderation. All right, see Mark Winslow again saying aloha from Honolulu. All right, we see someone checking in from Thailand. Wish I could read your name, but thanks for joining us from Thailand. And we have Valdi joining from Honduras. Thanks for being online with us. All right, Michael Granger is just saying hello from Warrington, UK. All right, we have a question from Monte de Sinai. How you cut the samples. All right, so let's say if we have a sample here, if you wanted to edit it, you could right click and you'll get a toolbox. So you could grab the scissors tool to cut, grab the eraser tool to erase, and then you can basically cut the samples there. So if we're applying this particular loop, you can see this is the area where I cut and erased. I have this set in the loop, which then it's going to come in. Also, if you wanted to you could use the scissor tool to cut. If you wanted to come over here, if you have the range tool, you could also just Control or Command X and cut out the part if you want. If you want to just split, you could hit Shift X and that will automatically cut based upon the selection. And so if we have a range selected here, and then I could just hit Shift plus the letter X and that will split it so that we have 1, 2, 3 separate parts from one sample. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Monty. All right, 1 gallon of butter pecan ice cream for John Costigan for Michael Teams. All right, so we see Ted Springman says, hi Greg, I'd like to create a library of guitar phrases in Halian and want to make sure the BPM plays back correctly in various future projects. Is that a musical mode thing? So I think usually the musical mode is going to be set up more for audio files, but because MIDI files which generally work. So I'm not sure if you're doing audio guitar phrases or MIDI guitar phrases. But if it's going to be audio, you'd want to just kind of place that into like a warp. So let's come over and so let's take a look. I'll just jump back over here. Let's do a quick guitar loop. Okay, so this audio file, when we go to look at it in the pool, so hit Control or Command plus the letter P. So we have our pop rock acoustic. All right, and we can see that this has an audio file of 80 beats a minute. All right, so if we now want to open this up inside of Halian Sonic or Halian, okay, we'll just come over here. Okay, so I'm going to drag this file over. All right, so now we have this particular audio file that we will drag. Let me just. All right, so as most samplers, how they work is when you play higher, it's going to speed up. You play lower, it's going to change the pitch as well. But I think if we come over, let's go, that we could turn this into, if we just put warping on, so we say our playback mode, that's not it. But there's a way that we could basically just kind of warp the audio so that it plays back. Okay, so if we go to mode, let's go to warp mode. All right, so now it's going to play back kind of whatever pitch. And let's go ahead and just put this into like our spectral mode. So let's say if I change my tempo here, let's say we're at 100, let's go to 140, and now, and let's see, I think we could have this sync to the tempo. So now when I come here, and now if we go back to 88 beats a minute when I play, it'll automatically synchronize with the particular tempo. So let me know if that's what you want to do. So once you have the audio in, just drag the audio file in. You want to go to the Edit tab, go to Zone, and then once you click on the Mode subtab, you could activate Audio Warp. And then you could choose to sync where you want it to be synced to beats, sync to be off, or sync to tempo. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Ted. All right, Alexander Plasko is asking how much sugar is in a gallon of ice cream. So when you have the virtual ice cream, it's 0 sugar-free, but still has all the great taste. All right, Ted Springman's received 1 gallon of amaretto chocolate ice cream. All right, Flyvy asks, is it a smart idea to merge once a song's MIDI beat is recorded to one file? So if you have like, a number of elements that you're kind of combining to make a particular, beat, whether it's kind of like bass and keys and drums or just, drums with kick, snare, hi-hat, I think it's always good to, I would always like the ability to have the individual components so that we could always go back if you change your mind. Unlike old days where people would make decisions when we had 4 tracks of analog tape to work with. So when we have decisions like where, we had limited numbers of tracks and we would have to record the bass, drums, and piano on one track, and then we could add the guitars and percussion and horns on another track all at once, and then record the vocals on, and maybe backup vocals on tracks 3 and 4, where we had to kind of always plan in advance. I think the flexibility of, it's always good to have the convenience of stuff that's kind of bounced together or kind of, merged. But I think it's always good to have the flexibility if you need to go back at any point later to just say, oh, I just want to make this snare a little brighter here on this hit. And it's harder to do that once everything is merged, but it's really easy when you have kind of the individual components. So I would always keep the original components unless your system is like really, really super slow and can't do basic things. So that's what I would do, is always kind of keep the originals because it's easy enough to, and it gives us that flexibility. Monte de Sinai is Cubase better than Pro Tools? So yeah, I think so. So I think what you see with Cubase is a broader approach to music production. And I think that you see a lot of the innovations that we see in the industry, where it's virtual instruments, being able to do all of your processing on your computer's power, integrating MIDI, audio, notation, The instruments that you get with it, the plugins that you get with it, I think are a really compelling package. I think it's going to be a better all-around tool than other DAWs. And we have these cool live streams twice a week. All right, Ted Springman says he's a fool for chocolate ice cream. All right, we have Da 76 Wah says hi from Stayner, Ontario, Canada. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're doing well. Queries just says this is cool. All right, great to see Rick from Bratman Studio back. We hope you had a wonderful trip to Maui. Look forward to hearing about it. He says, hey, Rick here. What's the best way to share patches I've made on Retrolog or PadShop, etc.? Where's the file I can send? He says, by the way, Maui was great. Chelsea got to go to Maui. It's always like so incredible. I was there about 6 months ago. So, but yeah, I love going there. All right, so if you want to share patches, so let's say we open up a Retrolog here. All right, and now as we play, all right, so say I've now All right, so say I like this particular patch and I made it and I want to share it with the world. I'm going to come over and I'm just going to save a preset of it. So we'll call it Bratman Studios. Okay, so we have our patch here. So to find your presets, and you could just send them as like a basic email. The easy way to do it is just to kind of come over. Let's go to your MediaBay. We're going to start at home. Let's go to user presets. So we'll see VST instrument presets, and then we could choose. So here we can see Bratman Studios, one that we just made. So the trick is once you're here in the MediaBay, just simply right click and say reveal in Finder, and then that will just take you directly to that particular folder. So once you kind of look at the folder structure for this, so let's say we want to see this as columns, we could just simply kind of come over here. This is where all of your user presets, so it'll reveal it for you in Finder on Mac OS or Explorer on Windows. And then you could just simply save those particular presets. So again, from MediaBay, starting from home, we will choose user presets, VST instruments, and then you could just, you could choose your particular instrument here if you wanted to. So if you want to come over here, let's go to media, or maybe plugin name. So if I wanted to come over here and say, okay, I'm looking for my Retrolog presets, I can now just come right over there and right click, reveal in Finder or Explorer, or show in Explorer, and then you can see the location of those particular presets, and you could just email them to other people. So I'm glad you had a great time in Maui and that you took time to be with your wife and didn't log in for Club Cubase live streams while in Maui. So, but it's great to have you back, Rick. All right. We have Andy Schaller checking in from Southern Germany. Thanks for joining us today. Glad you can make it. All right, so Ted Springman just says, also regarding those guitar phrases, I'd like to record them in one long track and quickly splice them every 4 bars and automatically assign across the keyboard. Okay, so let's take a look at that inside of Halian. So I'll just come over here. Let's... Okay, so we have kind of a blank slate in Halian. Let's come over and break apart some of our audio files here. Okay. Okay, so let's say I want to just basically split this. I'll hold down my Alt or Option key and we'll split. All right, and so that's all one audio file. Let's see if I can just do a quick render in place. We'll make them as separate events. Okay, here I'll just do... All right, so let's say these are my separate files. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to turn these into separate files. Okay. All right, so we'll open up our instance of Halian. All right, so I'm just going to drag these 4 files across. All right. And now when we look in our, so let's come over here to our mapping. So let me just probably even just drag in. So if we want this to be a particular range, okay, I want that to be in those particular keys. I want this. And we could also, here, I'll just show you kind of even faster way. Let me just undo these. All right, so I'm going to take those 4 files, and if I want to spread those across multiple keys to be triggered, I could do that. Or I could have them all on individual pitches. So I'm just holding down my left mouse button, and as we drag in, we could map those across. Like, let's say we want those to be an octave, and now when we play the particular files, we could do that. And now each of the samples, again, if we want to come over here to edit, to zone, and we could at this point just switch the warp mode on, but just take those 4 files, and if you open up kind of the mapping page, so again we'll come over here, drag those 4 files in so they can be mapped to where each sample is on its own key, or if you want to spread the samples across different keys as well, you could do that. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Ted. All right, so we see from Soren, just says, after a break in producing and mixing, just a week or so, I loaded a project and the save file worked to load. When I were to save it and it was corrupt, what causes What caused corrupt save functionality? Sometimes, and I had kind of a really fascinating conversation with one of the Steinberg developers at the NAMM show in January, and it was like a big group dinner, and I just sat next down to like one of the performance software developers, one of the performance engineers. And I asked him, I was like, sometimes you're working with the DAW, and it seems to me like computers should always be kind of have the same results all the time. But I'm like, sometimes if something misbehaves and you try it again a second time, it works. But I did exactly the same thing. Is like, am I crazy for thinking that? And he's like, no. What happens is sometimes files, if they're, causing a crash, they may kind of be searching out like what part of the memory to access. So he's like, if it misbehaves the first time, it takes a different path looking for memory or processing power the second time. So some of the code is kind of set up for that. So if you have a crash initially or something is misbehaving, you could try it again, and sometimes the problem will resolve itself. I was always under the impression that it would be exactly the same every time until we had this conversation together. But it was really interesting because I'm like, I swear it seems like this, like software has this personality, and it does, the second time it's forgiving with this, and am I crazy? And he's like, no, it's to be expected. So maybe it's one of those situations where, it figured out where to send the processing power and addressing memory to different locations. All right, Jackie G Official asks, how about ghost notes from others? So usually when I hear the question about ghost notes, there's a lot of different meanings of ghost notes. So sometimes it could be notes that are, kind of very muted. But let's say, and a lot of times, we get this, I think might be like a term used in FL Studio, where we want to only see the pitches of notes that are in the particular project. Like here we have a lot of notes, a lot of space, and I want to kind of maximize the efficiency of space. So if I don't have a note on a particular, like it doesn't look like we have an A natural 2 anywhere in this. So maybe I don't need to see that. So if we wanted to kind of hide notes that are out of scale or that don't have data, if we come up to the upper left-hand corner here, we could choose to show pitches with events. So now we're only looking at the pitches that have events, or we could have it follow based upon the scale assistant. So if we go to our scale assistant and we defined our key as being in, B flat major, we could now make sure that as we work that, we could see only the notes with the scales or only notes that are within B flat major. So if I move a note, we know that it's going to be within the scale that's been defined in the editor. So let me know if that's the kind of ghost note. So again, if you come over here, you'll see a pitch visibility on off. So you could try to adjust that right there. All right, Andy Schaller's just waving hello. All right. Andy Schaller just says he's just started recording a new song, so it's great to hear. All right, Michael Teams has granted my family, myself, 1 gallon of Texas fresh strawberry ice cream. Thank you so much. My son will like it. All right, always great to see Captain Energy Music, checking in from Pennsylvania in the United States. Andrew Fox just says, hi all, sorry I'm late. There's no tardy slips. You don't have to worry about being late. You just have to hit the like button if you're late. You have to do that immediately upon entering. All right, so we see Bratman Studio just asking if we can see this post. Sometimes it doesn't show, so we see that. Jazz Dude confirmed as well. Great to see Joel Plimmer on. Says, hi Greg, is it possible to scale MIDI time, set region, have just a first note anchored and drag to scale data to a desired endpoint? If it isn't available by dragging, how do you suggest doing it? All right, so let's say if I want to take these particular MIDI notes here, if we go to our object selection tool, we have a different mode here. So we have our normal sizing, and our sizing applies time stretch. So now if I go to resize, here we could kind of, proportionally kind of stretch the different MIDI notes to change their length. But we could also, on the main project window, so let's say if we undo that change, I'm going to switch if we wanted to kind of, we could do sizing applies time stretch here, and just kind of take our MIDI data, and if we want to make it fit within, 4 bars or 6 bars, 8 bars, that we could just kind of time compress the MIDI data here. So let me know if that would work for what you want to do, Joel. Great to see you on the live stream. All right, Lunerick asks, is there a ghost notes or in context editing feature to only display the chords or MIDI notes of one track when editing another instrument track? All right, to only display the chords or MIDI notes of one track while editing. So if you want to, let's say if I have a couple of MIDI parts here, all right. All right, so I have these two events, and I'll just change the color of this event to make it a little more obvious, which we'll show in just a minute. All right, so if we want to see, so if it's going to be just, the notes that we are, if you wanted to do the pitch visibility to only show the notes, or the, with events, or within the scale, so you have those two different choices there. Now if we're editing like another part, so let's say, okay, we want to edit both of these parts, so let's say, so we can see both of these, and we could choose to colorize these by part. So I could see like the red notes are what I just kind of drew in these parts. So we could have kind of our two parts that are visible here. And let me just, so you display the chords or MIDI notes of one track while editing. So here, we could see like one of the active parts, and then we could actually see the other parts in the background. So you could select multiple parts and see them. And then when I click on like the piano, like the electric piano part, that becomes the active editing part. And you could also just kind of switch right here in the left-hand side if you have that left-hand inspector open, so that you could do kind of multiple MIDI editing simultaneously. So you could, again, just come here, select the particular notes, and if you wanted to edit like kind of the like cheesy organ part, you could just click on that note, and that becomes the active part for editing. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to be able to see or do. All right, wonderful to see Balsa joining you from Montenegro. All right, Richard Willis asks, is there a quick way to apply that algorithm technique to all audio files at once? So if we go to the pool window, if we wanted to switch, if we wanted to switch like a number of the algorithms here for time stretching, I could just come right over here. I hold down, select the top, select the bottom audio file in the pool. And then if we wanted to change the algorithm, we could change it once, and that would automatically be applied to all selected files. So let me know if that's what you want to do. All right, Balsa asks, can a mic input track be sent to 2 Q-send mixes, one Q with all the insert effects on the track, the other dry bypass all the inserts? So what you can do is, let's say, so if you need to split it to like a dry and a processed sound, let's say, okay, I want to take this particular audio track here. All right. So if we want to send it to Q mixes, I'm going to open up my mixer here. So let's just get to the mix console. All right. And I'm going to right click. Let's set up our sections, and we want to see Q sends. Okay, so I want to take, this particular track here, and let's send it to QMix. All right, so I'm going to activate QMix 1. Let's activate our different QMixes here. All right, so we're going to send the level here. So we have our Q mixes. Now within the Q mix itself, if we go to our control room, so let's say, okay, we're going to send it to our drums and our guitar cues. So if we go to our if we select our Q mix here, so we have 4 Q mixes, we can now go to the inserts, and I could have on just this particular Q mix, I could say, okay, they want a delay and a reverb for the singer. So let's say, okay, we'll come over, we'll have our Q mix with effects. So this is what the singer is going to hear, but no one else wants to hear the effects in their Q mix. So this way, when we go to the inserts tab, we could have kind of master insert effects. We could also have insert effects for each speaker, but each headphone mix can have their own set of effects. So this way you could send one track to multiple Q mixes, and they could have different processing, and that processing would be basically just on in the control room Q mix section. So let me know if that would help with your scenario, Balsa. Nevo says, hi Greg, just want to say you helped me a lot with the MIDI remote issue in CC. All works great now. So glad to hear. Thanks for letting me know. And thanks for joining us again. All right, so we see from Andrew Fox asks, hi Greg, can you cover importing audio into a project with different sample rate, bit depth without affecting pitch of imported audio? I'm struggling to wrap my head around how everything interacts. All right, so bit depth, you could have multiple audio file bit depths within the same project, and that's not going to affect the pitch of the audio. What's going to affect the pitch of audio is going to be let's say our sample rate. So I'm going to, let's just open up a quick project here. And we'll take a look at our file. Okay, so I think that these are all 1644.1 files. All right, so we look at it. So yeah, so 16-bit 44.1. Okay, so let's take a listen to it just sonically here. All right, and I'm going to do a new project, and this project we're going to make it 48K. So I'll go to my project setup, where we could hit Shift plus S or go to the project menu to project setup. All right, let's switch to sample rate in this project, 48K. I'm going to import. In this case, I'm just going to drag all the files from this project into this project. All right, now there is a preference to be aware of, and this could mitigate a lot of problems. So if you go to your preferences or settings, and we go to editing to audio, we could say on import audio files, convert to project settings. Okay, so if that is unchecked, I come over, I take these files that are 44.1, all right, let me just, and I drag them over. So again, our musical frame of reference for pitch, I play this back. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to drag these files over to this project at 48K, and now we play it back. We'll make this the active project this time. All right. Now this should probably be off in pitch. So let's say this is at 48K, this project, which we see from going to our project setup. These files are at 44.1. If I go to my settings and I say convert to project settings, now when I drag these files over, and let's say if we change the settings, so then those settings can automatically be converted for you. So, you know, if you're switching sample rates a lot, it's always good to just say, you know, convert to project setting. You could do that. Now, if we wanted to actually take a file that has, let's say this is, we want to change the sample rate of a particular project. So let's come back to our original. So we listen to this. And again, these are 44.1 files. So if I want to change this to 48K, we could go to our project menu to project setup. We will choose our new sample rate, hit OK. We'll get, do you want to convert audio files to the new rate? We'll say convert. It says, do you want to keep the source files? Why not? Unless you're really hard up for hard disk space, you're really short. Do you want to keep audio files at their sample positions? Choose no. And now when we play back, it's going to be the same pitch, but all the files are now at 48K sample rate. So probably this preference, if you're not aware of it, under editing audio is a good one to have checked, and that could eliminate a lot of sample rate problems for you. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, Balsa asks question, which is more CPU intensive and better for live recording, sample-based or synthesized VST instrument, which is more likely to have less dropouts, clicks, pops? It's not, you know, it could be either, depending on the design of the instrument. So if you're doing You know, an orchestral violin that has, you know, 30 different, you know, samples per note, versus a one oscillator synthesizer with no filters. That particular synthesizer would take less CPU. If you're playing a sample-based instrument that's one sample, like let's say, or two samples, one sample of a kick and a snare, and you're doing a synthesizer with like 6 oscillators and 12 filters and modulation matrices, then that synthesizer would be more CPU intensive. A general rule of thumb would be like, you know, the more complex the sample instrument is, that could require more memory. The more complex the synthesis engine is, that could require more like audio processing capabilities. All right. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, Quellen asks, hey Greg, how can I find the key of an acapella? All right, so let's just come over. All right, so let's say I wanted to come here. You looked my way and your heart shone through. All right, so what you could do is just take like a vocal, or if you have everything like, you know, like harmonies in your acapella, open up a chord track and drag the file, the acapella file, to the chords, and then that would probably give you, I just have one single vocal part here. But that would... Do you recall the day we first met? That was a long... Obviously, when doing chord detection, if you have harmonies, you could just simply drag like the acapella part to a chord track, and that would give you the chords as well as the key right here. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. All right, we have Marvin Earl checking in from Rhode Island, saying hello to all the Cubasers. All right, Captainergy Music has gotten 1 gallon of coconut almond fudge ice cream from Michael Teams. Marvin, so we see from Quellen, can you speak about some useful key command, not only default commands? You know, so yeah, so there's kind of a lot of, I mean, there's obviously you know, like hundreds of key commands. If I were to say, okay, one that's like, you know, some that are super helpful, you know, one is when you select a part, hit the letter P, and that will automatically, you know, put the left and right locators. So if you wanted to loop a section, you could just come over here, select the event, and hit P. Now, if we wanted to play just a selection, so let's say I want to come here to this part, if I hold down Alt or Option plus P, right after that Garth Brooks, right after that Garth Brooks, right after that, we could just cycle that particular area. If I want to come over here and hold down Alt or Option plus Shift plus P, we can, like a long, long time ago. So we can just solo and loop and play the selected area. So if I want to come here, Alt or Option plus Shift plus P. Seems like a long, long time ago. And if I want to hear that in context, I can now just hit Alt P, not Control P. Seems like and I can hear it in context. Time ago. What's coming down next time. So we could just kind of solo listen to it in context. You know, and know your transport. If you have a numeric keypad, you know, use that for your transport, because like the enter key is play, 0 is stop, You have also the period key will take you like to the beginning of the project. 1 could take you to the left locator, 2 to the right locator, 3 through 9 other locators. So for me, like that numeric keypad is always kind of my right hand and my transport. But if there's particular key commands that you're looking for, just let me know. All right, Bratman Studio. Rick has received 1 gallon of Texas fresh peach ice cream, in case he had too many pineapples while in Maui. All right, Andy Schaller just says thanks. All right. Sorry, my chat field jumped. Let me just... All right, Uno Momento wants people to whack the like button. Ted Springman just says awesome. Thanks, Greg, for the Halian question, I think. All right, Richard Willis says, I have my instrument libraries on an external SSD. I've noticed that there is a lag between me pressing the keys on my Arturia Essential 66 and the sound reaching my ears. I have set the buffer when recording and it still happens. Is there a way to stop this? So latency could be caused. It's probably not going to be the USB drive unless it's on, I would check any... if you're, make sure you're connected directly to the computer, because that could, or a powered hub. But probably what a lot of people don't realize is, that you could adjust your buffer kind of like, let's say I wanted to come here and just play, like the little felt piano here. So if I open up my virtual keyboard, we can see that when I click on the mouse, that it's pretty instantaneous. But if we have plugins in the project, so let's say if I put on a plugin that had a lot of latency, so let's come over here to the vocal chain. All right, and this plugin has lots of processing power on it. So now if I put a couple of vocal chains in this particular, let's say I go to in my project, and now we open up our virtual keyboard again. That the plugins themselves cause latency. So because it's having to kind of prefetch all of the audio data. So one of the things that you could try to do is in the bottom left-hand corner, if we come over here, so we have this little icon, it's called the constrained delay compensation. So if you have a lot of plugins with latency, then you could determine that also just by when we click here and on the inspector, we could see setup sections, and one of the ones is like the channel latency. So when we go to a particular channel, we can see, I have 500 milliseconds of latency here because of these 2 plugins. So that could give you an idea if the plugins in your project are causing a lot of latency. So a lot of plugins that have to kind of look ahead can often, cause latency in some of those plugins you want to have for mixing. And not necessarily like when you're recording, and that's why we give you the ability to come over here. If we look at these 2 plugins with high latency, and I could say constrained delay compensation, which basically is meaning turn off the plugins that have high latency. So you could just try turning that button on. But it's not just a buffer size, it's a buffer size plus plugins that could that could add to your perceptible latency. All right, so we see Balsa just says new favorite for vocal throws. Right click on the on off send effect button in the left channel zone and select show enable automation track, and right turn on automation under words and phrases. I'll show you another way if you want to do a quick vocal throw. So let's say, okay, we want to do something here. We'll do something highly inappropriate in this track.
Do you recall the day?
Right, let me just revert it. Excuse me for the cough. That's why I have a mute button. I unmuted it too quickly. All right, so let's take a look at this vocal. Let's do a quick delay throw on it.
Do you recall the day we first met? That was a long, long time ago.
All right, so say I want to take the word ago here. I'm just going to select that word and I'll just kind of extend it out. We will come over to our audio menu to plugins. Let's throw a studio delay on. I want it to be a quarter note delay. All right, so we have, I'm going to say auto apply. We will. So now when we listen to it,
Call the day we first met. That was a long, long time ago.
I can say, oh, maybe I did want a half note delay. So I'll just come over here, change that. And now that will.
We first met. That was a long, long time ago. It was 7th grade in the school park.
So you can actually kind of render it in, and then you say, oh, I really didn't like that particular plugin. And, you know, let's say we wanted like reverb or whatever, or if we wanted to just simply change that even after saving your project, I could just come over here and say, okay, maybe I want a mono delay. Let's make it half note, and that selected area. So now as soon as we
It was 7th grade in the school parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us home.
So let's say, okay, we want to do the word home there.
It was 7th grade in the school parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us home.
So I'll just take the word home, and again, we'll just process that delay. So again, I could just say, okay, let's just go to the plugins, and on that part, we want a delay. So now
it was 7th grade parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us home. You look my way.
So, and then like if you just select, you could say, oh, I hated every single process I did. I could delete all. So that's another great way of kind of doing delay throws as well. And it's just kind of written in the file. So, but you could also automate. Both are completely valid, great ways of working with that. All right, so we see from Soren, says I tried to save several times, got corrupt. Save crashes. After that, I started with no third-party plugins, and save work to make, but the loading that and saving from it, that's where the crash was. All right, we see comment from John Costigan. Says, thanks, Greg, for the explainer on repeating operations that have crashed or misbehaved. I always thought this never worked, but it does. All right. All right, Captenergy Music just says, please smash the like button, folks. All right. All right, Joel Plimmer just says, thanks, Greg, regarding MIDI timing. So you're welcome. All right. Randy from Radar the Band has received 1 gallon of banana nut ice cream for him and his wife. All right. Wonderful to see Millard Brown from Pennsylvania in the United States joining us. All right, Ted Springman says, been practically living in spectral layers on a drum editing marathon for weeks now. The virtual chocolate ice cream definitely helps. See Jazz Dude sharing a link with a lot of useful keyboard shortcuts and macros. All right, we have Tiago joining from Brazil. All right, and we see Tiago says, hey, Greg, any news from my free warp markings plus bounce events? So I was kind of playing with it. I couldn't open up the project. It said it was like too big for it to decompress on my Mac. But let's take a quick look. So Tiago had asked a question. Let me pull the question up and read it. It says, hey, Greg, the correct warp markers I did manually in project window using free warp tool. After that, I bounced the files and the new files were populated with many audio warp markers. Those were put in the same distance. I think this Cubase tried to lock the position of the file. However, the position of the WAV file, images, waveform, visualization of project, and sounding does not coincide with the exact position I made previously. Sometimes they stay correctly, other times no. Sometimes it happens when I close Cubase and open a project again. I could figure it out exactly when it happens and what processes are involved, but it happened many times in different projects. Usually I do manual time alignment of my tracks, and after I finish the process, at some point in my work, this alignment issue occurs and I have to manually do it again. Bouncing in track versions do not help. Tried many different things. Okay. So when we're doing like warp editing, all right, so let's say we have kind of a file here. Okay, so I wanted to do just some free warp editing on this. So let me just... Okay, so, when we are doing free warp, so let's say we, it seems like Tiago had kind of placed the warp markers in manually. So I'm not sure if you did it in the project, in the sample editor or the project window. I don't think it really matters, but I'm just going to come over here. So we could put in some warp markers. I'll just do this and make it very large and obvious as we're working. All right, so let's say we want to put in some warp markers along these lines here. Okay, so let's say we've done free warping. So I'll kind of group all of these drums. I'm going to duplicate this so we could compare. Okay, so we're going to have our original in this track version. Okay, so I want to we'll space these out here. We'll make all these, we'll just warp a bunch of these and make them all very tight rhythmically. Okay, and these warp markers are going to be tied to this particular file. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let's duplicate that version. So we have our original version here. We have our version here where we've warped a bunch of stuff together, and this is our copy of that. So now that we have warped all these different elements, I'm going to do a bounce selection. Or we could just do a render in place as well. So let's come over and let's render in place. All right, so now that we look at this, we can see kind of from the original file that these are all pretty much in line. Now, once we've rendered a file, you know, we've created a new file, we've done the warp editing, and we've placed the warp on this file. But once we render it, there's not going to be any kind of, you know, warp markers. So if I come over here to this file, you know, warp markers aren't going to be carried over with this. So, you know, just be aware that this is a brand new audio file, so you may have to populate. So I was just curious if when you were doing this, and I saw your video where it looked like everything was kind of spaced out. But as we do that, let's go to the sample editor here. All right, and so if we are in our definition tab, if this is happening, we can say auto adjust. And now when we go to like our warp markers, and when we go to free warp here, let's say we'll switch to our free warp tool on this. All right, so let's make sure I have this right. So, you know, when you see everything that's kind of perfectly aligned, it would seem to me like if you go to auto adjust, now you can see that these warp markers are kind of aligned to quarter notes. So I wonder if you have in the definition tab, like, you know, this, you know, where it's automatically going to adjust to the downbeats here of every single downbeat. So it looked to me like maybe something in the definition was hit on a new file, but all of the warp markers that you have put onto one particular file. So, you know, when we come over here and, you know, we have the warp markers set, you know, that these files, when we render, those warp markers aren't going to be included with the render. So that, you know, those warp markers aren't carried over because it is a new, separate, distinct audio file. So let me know if that makes sense, Tiago. Thanks for sending the video over. All right. Balsa just says, thanks, Greg, for the tip regarding QMix and insert effects. Great solution. Wish non-Cubase users and Cubase users would know how much value is in the control room. So, yeah, it's a great feature. I'm surprised other companies haven't copied it as closely. So you see from Andrew Fox, says, Greg, thanks for the great answer about sample rates. It's exact information I needed. So glad to be able to help. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped. Let me find my spot. Okay. All right. Always wonderful to see Pertti Komenen checking in from Finland. Yak Martin is also adding, hit the asterisk on the numeric keypad for record. So, yeah, on Windows. It works on Mac as well. All right, and Yak Martin is saying shalom, everybody from Krautland. All right. Michael Team says, I constantly learn from other people's questions. That's one of the things I think is unique to this format, but it's great to hear. All right, Balsa just says, thanks, Greg, for explaining the different scenarios regarding CPU usage of sample versus synth. I'll go with the synth route. Does Cubase have any synthesized pianos, e-pianos, and CPU-friendly oscillators? So any of the kind of built-in, like, if I had to, like, when I'm looking for Rhodes, just to kind of tinker around with, like, a Rhodes sound, I'll go to, like, Halian Sonic, which will have synthesizers as well. Think of this as like kind of a playback engine. My kind of go-to Rhodes sounds, Silk Rhodes. So, and you'll see it under Sonic Selection probably. So, I generally kind of use this as, and for synthesis, if you're looking for simple or very complex synthesis, really check out Retrolog. So you could, like when you get started, you can start off with a basic single oscillator. You could say, okay, I want this to be a multi-oscillator. So, whether you want it to be square wave, triangle, saw. I always like to put it on kind of the multi, and if we increase this, get adjusted tuning, you got your filters, you have your envelope here. And if you wanted to add, like a sub oscillator or a little bit of noise, and you could come over here and just start building your own synthesis sounds right there. So pretty much any virtual analog synthesis functions you could do inside of Retrolog very easily. All right, wonderful to see Mark Rabin on. He says he's in a session and wants to send love to the whole Cubase family. So thanks for joining us today. Everyone give a big woof to Stella, Mark Rabin's dog. Mark's in Montana in the United States. All right, Pablo Vasquez has made it. All right, the wonderful drummer from Hot Mess from Galicia, España. So just on the northwestern part of the Iberian Peninsula. Everyone's always happy when Pablo is online. All right, so you see Loonrick says in Cubase 14, when replacing an instrument track with another, the name does not change to the new one. It'd be great if the ability to replace audio track samples could be implemented. All right, so let's say if we're doing we'll just do a new project here. All right, so let's say we start off with pad shop sound. All right, so we'll play. Here, I'll just do another. All right, so we have Halian sonic instrument. So let's just load up kind of. All right, so let's say we have our Halian sonic here. Okay, so this track already exists. So if we go to, let's say, our VST instrument rack, this track has already been created. So if I change this to the grand, since the track is already there, it doesn't assume to change the track name. So let's say, if we want to come over, okay, we have like CP80. Now, if we are, I think assuming that we're going to change the sound. Now, when we're working with this, we could also, just say, okay, I want to take, backbone, and let's see, if we come over here. So we could just, drag and drop, but, since the track exists, like if you said, this is my favorite name for the track at this point, when we drag over a groove agent on it, we don't assume that you want the track name to change, because let's say you just say, okay, it's synth bass. You could get to synth bass from, let's say we come over to Retrolog, all right, and I want a synth bass. It's still going to be a synth bass, and now it's playing a synth bass through a different instrument. So we don't naturally assume that you want to change the track name. If you wanted to make a new track, what you could do is just kind of, let's say if we're in our VST and we go to our VST instruments and we say, okay, I want a grand. Now when we drag over, then we get the name of the particular instrument there. But, if you had already named the track, if the track has an existing name, now if you wanted to have the name of the preset, if we double click and we say, okay, let's go to FM Lab, okay, and I want this particular preset, if I drag the preset over, that preset name will be carried over. But that's because we specifically chose it to do that. So I don't think it makes sense to automatically, replace the existing track name when you replace an instrument. Because if you had already named it something like synth bass, you probably don't want it to say Retrolog or Halian Sonic or Halian. You still probably want it to say synth bass. But when you're starting, if you want to have the name of the instrument, you could just drag it over. The name of the instrument's automatically there. So that's kind of the reasoning, I think, behind it. All right, and the second part of the question is, it would be great if we had ability to replace audio tracks samples could be implemented. So I think we could do that already. We'll show you a trick. Let's see if I... Okay, so let's say we have a bunch of kicks that are kind of in a project and we want to replace all of the kicks. I'm just going to come over. Let me just put a quick side chain on this. Okay, make sure I don't kill everyone volume-wise. Okay, so let's say we have this kick. Okay, so now I want to replace those particular, every instance of this kick that's in the project. I'm just going to come over and let's just search for kick. All right, I can just look in different sample packs. So let's see. Let me just look in. All right, so I'm looking for kicks. All right, so when you come over here, all right, so we have a lot of different kicks. So if I wanted to come over here, let's just take these kicks. And what I want to do is drag over a new sample and hold down the Shift key. And it'll ask you, do you want to modify all the events that refer to the same material? Say all. So if we want to listen to that in context. So again, I could just take the sample, drag it over. Drag the sample, hold down the Shift key. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to do, and you could also do similar things in Groove Agent or the drum machine as well. So try holding down the Shift key and drag over. Right, Jazz Dude sharing a link about Trip and Flux, which are great synths that come with Cubase as well. All right, Lunrick says in Cubase 14, when selecting an effects insert or switching between different insert slots, the UI does not clearly reflect which effect is active or focused, and deleting it is the same. All right, let's take a look. All right, so I think I've okay, so let's say I have like a few inserts here. Okay, it says when selecting effects, an effects insert or switching between different insert slots, the UI does not clearly reflect which effect is active. Okay, so let's say we open up a number of so are you, so when you select, you could see that the other, like the one, it could be a little subtle, I'd agree, but you can see that, of the selected ones, that the top menu bar is darker. But let's see if we come over here. So when we have kind of multiple inserts, if you look at, this is the selected one, it's kind of a darker shade at the top. So let me know if that's kind of what you mean. I'll reread the question again. Yeah, so, just look for, you could see that if you have multiple inserts, the one that is kind of less white is the currently active one. So let me know if that's helpful for you. And I agree, it could be a little subtle, but I think if you know to look for that you'd be in good shape. All right, we see Dwight Cunningham checking in from the Bahamas. great to see you on, as always. Pablo is saying Steinberg has an app. The name is Ice Cream Pro. Works well in Cubase. I believe it was developed in Texas, near Dallas, Fort Worth area. All right. Richard Willis says, can you demonstrate the multi-tap delay and how to use it for snare in particular? Okay. All right. Let's open up project with some multi-track drums. Okay, so let's say we want to take okay, so I'm just going to go to my inserts here. Let's do like a multi-tap delay. All right, so the multi-tap delay is probably like, arguably probably one of the most comprehensive delay plugins. All right, so let's say I want to do like an eighth note delay here. And let me just put that into a quick loop. Okay, if I put it on the right track, that would help. All right. Okay, so we'll go to our delay. So delays on snares are always fun. All right, so let's say, okay, we want to have our feedback down. So let's say we want it to be maybe like an eighth note delay. And then you could also do stuff like, okay, I want it to be like a dotted eighth note delay. And we have some other tracks that are kind of bleeding through. All right, so if we want more feedback where we have the delays kind of cascading, let me just see if I could get a better... I'll just program a quick beat here so we could isolate this snare. Okay. All right, let me just do this so the snare's not doing tracks that are bleeding through. All right, so let me just put this on. right, and I'll just copy this out a bunch of times. All right, so let's say we have this going on. All right, and I'm going to route this snare to a different output here just so we can play around with it some more. Okay, so we have our snare isolated here. Okay, so on this particular track, let's put our multi-tap delay. All right, and let's change our delay time, let's say to 1/8 notes. All right, so if we want just one delay, so we could do that, and let's come over and make it, and always, when delays, always experiment with like dotted. And then we have the feedback. So we could have more delays. Now, as we're working with this, let's be a little creative. We can now run our delays through different plugins. So if I want only the delay to be processed, I could say, okay, let's come over here to our loop, and let's say, okay, I want this to, just a delay to have reverb. So now just those delays, but not the original, is being processed. Now we could also put in different taps. So let's say we want to maybe put in fewer taps. Now I could say, okay, we want tap 2. To have, so we could go to our tap effects, and let's put an auto pan on the delay. So, but just on tap 2. And let's put on maybe a filter. So now we could process just the different effects, and if we wanted to now come over to just, you know, our different effects, we could also just have kind of post effects. So I want all the delays to go through a pitch shifter. And then if I wanted like this particular parameter, we could also just say, okay, let's go to a modulator, and I want to control, you know, like the particular pitch. So I could come over here, let's do an LFO, and I want to control just the tuning of that. You know, you could do stuff like that as well. So all sorts of really creative stuff that you could do. So, you know, again, you could take the actual delay itself and run the delay through different processing. You could add different taps, and those taps you could also just say, okay, when we go to our delay tap, you know, we could choose to, you know, do our editing of the taps as well. So all sorts of great stuff you could do for creative delays on snare drums. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Pablo has forgotten all his questions again. There's this great thing called a computer where you could type them up and store them. So if you have bad memory, you could do that. All right. Sorry, my chat field jumped on me. All right, so we have Leonardo Sants, just says hi from the UK. Thank you, team. All right, we have Mark Tapley, composer, producer, saying hi from Central Massachusetts in the United States. Thanks for joining us. All right, Matt Elston just saying hi to myself, Jazz Dude, Agent K, Jan, and Michael Teams, and the awesome Cubase community. All right, Leonardo Sant says, can you give us another example of how to identify BPM from a full EDM track? All right, so let me see. I may have a quick. Okay, so let's say we have. All right, so one easy way of doing it is, you could come over here and just say, okay, where you see a downbeat. So let's come over here. We could say, okay, I want to grab my warp tool. So a lot of EDM tracks are going to be pretty consistent timing, but sometimes there may be fluctuations within a measure due to the groove. But if we come over here, we can say, okay, let's do warp grid, and we can say, okay, here's measure 3 starts right there. So let's say. I'll wait for. But we could basically just kind of find. Let's say, okay, we have. All right, so we say measure 2 is right at this point. So I move the downbeat. And then we could just kind of come right over here and say, okay, that point we know that we're about 148. So at that point we could just kind of come right over here. Now, another way of doing kind of the most accurate way probably is just to go to select, and if you wanted to come over here, go to your tempo track and do tempo detection. And now when we analyze, so let's say I'm going to do a quick. You can see even like tracks that, and now we made a tempo map. So let's say we'll, so we listen to it coming up here. So let's say I'll just take this track down. So even stuff that seems like it's perfectly steady as you're doing grooves and you're kind of speeding up and slowing down, that tempo will fluctuate. So again, go to your project menu to tempo track and do tempo detection. All right. See Brian Sawyer checking in from Yuma, Arizona. Hope you're well. Yak Martin just says, and you got tons of filters with inbuilt distortion and modulation and inbuilt sequencer. If that weren't enough, you can use modulators on Cubase 14 with Retrolog. All right. Mark Raven says, lately I've been doing the very audio sub-bass export thingy. It helps. John Koskin is showing off with his Spanish skills. All right, Yanko Michael Neelis says, hi, I tried to do the device manager, to use the device manager in Cubase Pro 14, Windows 10, and 11, but it's unusable. Is it just me or is it broken? Creating presets and later choose them inspector doesn't work at all. All right, so, is it a device panel that you're working with? So let's take a look. So let's come over to, let's say, our MIDI device manager. All right, so let's come over. Let's see. We have an M1. We'll install our device. Okay, let's open our device. I haven't done this in a while. All right, so let's add a panel. So let's say we'll do our inspector size. Hit OK. I don't really have a all right, so let's come over here to like a fader. Okay, so let's come over here and say we want this to be modulation. Okay, I want to have panning. And if you're not familiar with this, we could basically make like a little, so let's make this main volume. Kind of make like little visual parameters. All right, so let's say we have all right, so now I'm going to add a panel here. So let's add a MIDI track. I'm going to assign this to our VL70. All right, we'll connect it to a MIDI port for now. Let's get to our device panel. Let's see if I had to save it. I haven't done this in a while, but if we come over, see if I have to save the device panel here. And let me see if I need to be on a particular MIDI channel. And then here's my panel that I could adjust here. So let me know if it's a device manager panel that you're working with, but that could be for every single MIDI channel if you want it to be. So now if we have CC 10 or 7, or 1, that we could control those particular parameters. So you could have kind of like synth editors right there. So, but let me know if you've gotten that far with it. All right. All right, so we have George says, I recently encountered a phenomenon when I open up a plugin, example Pro Q3 1176, one of the parameters gets changed down to very low numbers, close to 0 during playback. So I don't have, if you have a file, like a project that you want to send me, I don't have Pro Q3. I have the Universal Audio 1176 plugin. But if you have a project that you want to share with me, I'd be happy to take a look at it. You could see if there's perhaps any automation in the particular project. Sometimes maybe, it was automated. So if you want to, just come over here and see if you see any automation, if there is automation in a particular parameter, you'd see an asterisk to the left to indicate that there is automation for particular parameters. So just make sure that there is no automation that was accidentally written into the particular file. All right, Swarup Mandal just says, hi, a few days ago, upgraded from Cubase 13 Pro to 14. All right, so Pablo is just saying that's a great one, Greg. Wish I knew what it was. All right. All right, and we see also from George says, my guess was that the STH with the MIDI inputs was a culprit, so I used a MIDI monitor, but nothing to be found there. The error doesn't occur regularly. It seems as if it's some source sends to the plugin when it's opened. Can you point me to things I could check in order to find the culprit? So, again, check to see if there's any automation. If you have a MIDI remote, make sure that, perhaps that particular plugin parameter isn't selected or isn't assigned. If you look through your MIDI remote here, you could see if any of the parameters, when we go to our, let's say our MIDI remote mapping, the mapping assistant, check all of the parameters here and see if any of them are being assigned to a particular plugin, to the plugin parameters that are kind of being affected. Sometimes if MIDI remotes are dying, they sometimes can transmit MIDI information as well, but make sure it's not a default state for the plugin. Like if you see it actually change, I would, look to make sure that no automation was written or that it's, currently maybe not assigned as a quick control from a MIDI remote as well. So, see if you're using a MIDI remote, if you disconnect it, if it is still doing it. But maybe the MIDI remote is sending erroneous information to particular plugins. But if you have a project file that's going on, I don't have the Q3 plugin, but I'd be happy to take a look at it for you. And you could send it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, boss, it just says, can a stereo drum bus or any other stereo group bus be sent to a mono QMix that QMix can get out of a single line out from my audio interface? So yeah, it can. Obviously, you would lose the, the stereo goodness of it, but you could send it out to a mono QMix if you needed to. All right, you see Pablo is happy with multitap snare delay. All right, so Andy Schaller says, thank you for all the helpful information, but now I have to go out. Maybe we'll see each other next time. Great. I know you'll have a great day, Andy. So thanks for joining us today. We hope to see you on many future live streams. All right, Swarup Mandal asks, my question is, how can I set up a 16-channel contact instrument set with all the MIDI routing as a preset so that I can call them anytime? Is it possible in Cubase? I'm using Cubase Pro from 2024. So if you have, I don't have a contact license here, but if I wanted to go to, let's say, my instrument, and I wanted to do, let's say, I'll do like a Halian 7, which is kind of equivalent. So let's do a multi-instrument. All right, so I have this saved. Let's jump to another preset. Okay, we load up our bass on slot 2. Let's say a Halian Sonic voice on slot 3. All right, so we have R on. Let's come over here to Trip, our wonderful underrated instrument. All right, let's come over to Flux. All right, and we'll do an Iconica. So we have all these different sounds that we could see loaded up. So if I want, let's save this as a track preset. So I'm going to just right click here, save track preset. We'll call it October 7th, 2025. Okay, I'm going to do a new project. And let's get to our track presets. So say user presets, VST instruments. Let me just, track presets, VST instruments. I thought that was, all right, let's make sure I save that. Just come back over here real quick. So I know also within Halian 7 that we could save a multi-program. So I'm going to come over here and say October 7th, 2025, multi. Okay, so let's go over to our other new project. So I'm sure that, let's come over here. So here's our October 7th, 2025. So we would just save it as a preset. So I'm sure that you could do that within Contact, save a multi-preset if you needed to. So, try saving it as a preset. But let's see if I come over. I'll delete this real quick. And let's see, I have my track preset. So let me see if I could just load that up. So let me remove this selected track. I'm going to add track using track preset. And let me just search in here. It might be under track preset multi. But yeah, just save it as a directly as a preset inside. So I'm sure you could do in Contact. I don't have a license of Contact on this computer, but you should be able to just save that. All right, Richard Willis says, yes, very helpful with the multi-tap delay and snare. All right. You see that Stella, Mark Rabin's dog loves bananas. All right. All right, Grono says why Cubase, MediaBay, and the right media panel does not see audio files in most folders. I work with lots of sound libraries, and it does affect workflow. Have other people been talking about these issues? All right, so most sound libraries don't have just the raw WAV files. They're kind of in a container. So, when we come over here, if we're looking for, different audio files. So like your VST instruments, all your presets here. So even though we have like Pad Shop is using samples, the Grand is using samples, you don't necessarily see, C1 velocity 0 through 4, C1 velocity 5 through 9. So those are going to be kind of self-contained files that are for the library. So while a lot of instruments will play back different samples, like if we come over here, we go to our VST instruments, we go to Groove Agent. There's lots of samples in Groove Agent, but you may not have access to every raw sample, so depending on the instrument, and it's, could be to preserve intellectual property, because it takes a long time to create these instruments with a lot of painstaking detail. So we don't, as soon as a file is created, that's, an instrument's created that uses samples, we may not just put all the samples out there that could be easily copied. So there's lots of companies that do that. That's pretty normal. So that's why you may not see, sound files for instrument presets, because it's kind of self-contained as well. So let me know if that makes sense, or if you have particular instruments. But if I wanted to, come over, okay, I'm looking at, drum loops. I could just say, okay, well, I'm looking at loops and samples. I could come over here. I could see all the instruments within that collection. If I want to go to my file browser, I could say, okay, I want to see everything in this particular folder. So I'm going to go to Documents, and I'm looking for in this folder, and I could see all of my audio files directly in this particular folder. So we could see kind of your file hierarchy here, but just because you have an instrument that's playing samples doesn't necessarily mean that all those samples are freely available to access from any computer program. All right, Richard Willis says, on the tempo map, do you have to keep the time signature at 1/4 if you want to keep the fluctuating tempo? So no, all you have to do is just find where the 4/4, like where the downbeat is. And, we don't assume that all music is in 1/4 time or in 4/4 time. Lots of great pieces have been written in 3/4, 6/8, 7/8. So if, the tempo detection calculates the beats, and then you could define the time signature based on a downbeat. So if you have a pickup note, but you could just, like where the downbeat is, start that at 4/4. And then you'll be all set, or whatever the appropriate time signature is. Okay, Michael Teams has a question. And Michael's question is, I have a song that I imported tracks from a different song. They show up in a media pool, but not in the track view. Where did they go? So it could be when you go to import a song. I'll give it a try here. So let's say we want to import tracks from project, and I'll come over here. Let's open this project, and then make sure that you have track data to be imported, that you have events and parts. So let's see what happens if I come over here and I import. So we could have kind of all of our tracks. Let me do that one more time. Okay, so I'm going to select all. So if you make sure that you have events and parts. So if I do this, we're going to now have all of our events selected. And if we go to our pool window, we'll see if all of our files. So make sure that, when you do that, Michael, and you go to import the tracks and project, make sure that you have like the events and parts, and you may, if you have a range selected, try turning that off, but make sure you have the events and parts selected there. All right, so Vance or Yanko, Michael, Neelis, I'm very sorry, it's a misunderstanding. I was talking about device manager, new device, create multiple new presets. I can't see them in the inspector. Seems broken. Only creating them makes them not appear. So are you trying to create like a patch name script for an external synthesizer? So if you come over here, you say go to your MIDI device manager. Okay, and we're in our MIDI device manager. We'll say new device, and we'll create multiple new presets. All right, so let's say install device. We'll define new. Okay, so we'll come over here and we'll give it a name. So we'll call this Yanko. And we'll hit OK. Okay, so now that we're here, we could assign a particular control. Now we come over here to open device. Now, have you gone through your patch banks here? Do you have like, so if we create a bank, and then you could assign the LSB, MSB files, or if you have a patch script, you could do that. So, let me know what instrument you're trying to do it with. There was kind of an old utility that you could use called Script Maker, I think, that you might still be able to find on the Steinberg that could simplify the process, but this is for creating like the patch name scripts. A lot of people will use Excel to do it, and that way the MSB, LSB can automatically, and then you could paste it as a text file and copy it into the folder. But let me know kind of what your intention is. Is it a new instrument? Is it, because these are designed to be like patch scripts for hardware instruments. So that's the design intention, so that when we're over here, I could add so let's say I want to go to my, I have an M1. So I say, okay, let's go I add a MIDI track because it's external MIDI. So we'll come over, okay, I want this to be my M1. We add the track. And now as we come over here, let's say we have this going to my M1, I could now come over and see all of my patch name scripts. So these are scripts that are in the project so that we could actually select the voices by name. So that's the intention. So let me know if you want to do that and what hardware device you have. And do you have a list of all of the patch scripts that you're typing in manually? All right, we see Daniela on from Bochum, Germany. All right, we see Val from Vienna says, sorry, can't make it today. Still at session, but it wants everyone to have a nice weekend. All right, hopefully we'll see you on Friday. All right, we see Randy from Radar. The band has to jet. All right. So you see Tiago says, Greg, in your example, you rendered new files not exactly aligned with the original. If you zoom in, repost it, skip the comment for something. I'm sorry I missed that. Let's take a look at it. I think it's in this file here. All right, so I'll just re-render here. We'll start from scratch. Sorry I missed that, Tiago. Okay, so we have our original file here. All right, and let's say at measure 2, we want to do our warping. All right, so we'll duplicate the version. Okay, so let me just try a bounce selection. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this. All right, so we have our original. You can see measure 2 spread out. All right, so I'm going to duplicate this track so we're on version 3. Okay, let's duplicate that track and let's go back to our warped. So you see this one is slightly off. First two, you can see visually it's off a little bit. But let's just see what happens if we play just this little part here. Yeah, I see what you mean. I think this is what you're talking about. It's kind of offset. Let me see what if we get similar behavior if we do. And let me see if we have. I'm going to just do a snap to 0 crossing here. Now I have snap to 0. Let's see if that makes a difference. All right, we're going to make sure. Okay, we're in a second. Yeah, so it does look a little different. I'll play around with it and see if I can figure something out, Tiago. But I have enough to kind of show development team with that, and I can do some more research on that. So thanks for reminding me. Sorry, I missed your question earlier. All right, Swarup Mandal asks, my second question is today, I can't fully use my NI A25 controller for MIDI, CC, and contact. Connecting knobs to control contact is not possible. Is it integrated with Cubase, or am I missing something wrong? So, it's probably, Cubase is going to transmit any and, deal with any MIDI CCs that are captured from the controller keyboard. So if you this knob is transmitting CC25, Cubase will record that, and Kontakt will respond to that, to whatever message is needed for it to respond to. So, so I don't think it's going to be now. If you have your controller configured as a MIDI remote, so if you wanted to control different parameters inside of instruments, if you wanted straight CC communication, like moving this knob will equate to this control parameter in Kontakt, then that would be just a straight MIDI CC. Cubase would do that. If you're utilizing the MIDI remote, the MIDI CCs kind of become the language for the parameter. So we use the MIDI CC to control the parameter, and then we assign the parameter to the function in the plugin. So if you're using it as a MIDI remote through Cubase, then you could just simply you would need to assign these parameters to adjust. So if we open up a particular instrument here, all right, so let's say we open up this instrument, we could now kind of right click on particular instruments and we could assign quick controls or assign MIDI remotes. So I could just just kind of come right over here and assign different parameters to the MIDI remote. So if you're using your Kontakt controller as a MIDI remote, or as like a Mackie control device, or a MIDI remote script, then the MIDI CCs are coming in to control. It's the MIDI CCs are used to control the parameters, and these parameters are assigned to the instrument. If you're not using that, then the MIDI CCs will just go straight from as you record in Cubase to the assigned track, and that MIDI CC will control Kontakt or the VST instrument. So if you want direct control, don't use it as a MIDI remote, or don't have it set up as a when we come over here as a remote device, kind of for the legacy systems. So if you have that, then the MIDI CCs are kind of being used, and then the MIDI CCs are then controlling other parameters. But if you want the straight MIDI CCs, don't use it here, or don't use the MIDI remote. Probably, the MIDI remote is probably the best way to go, I think, for most people, but it's not a direct communication. Then you have to assign the parameters. But once you do it once, then you're all set. All right, Drowsy Eternal says, how do I lock the locators in place so that they won't slide out of place when I change the tempo? Okay. Okay, so let's come over here. I'm going to set my left and right locators, let's say around a particular event here. Okay, so we have my left and right locators. So I think, if your master time is set to bars and beats, when I come over here and I adjust my tempo, you'll notice that regardless if I come from 120 to 100, that everything here will stay in the time positions. So if I change my tempo from 100 to 140, my left and right locators stay the same. Now, if your master time is set to seconds and I change the tempo, so I go to 100, everything, the values will change because the tempo is changed. So just make sure that your master time is set to bars and beats. And then when you switch tempo, it's always going to be bar 9. It may be a different tempo, but bar 9, maybe it's at 16 seconds at 120 beats a minute. And when you go to 100 beats a minute, it may be at 20 seconds. So that will change. So just make sure that your master time is set to bars and beats. Sometimes people say, oh, it just moved, and it's playing at the same time. But basically what's happening is, you're looking at the time, not the bars and beats, but often when I get this question, it's going to be that the master time is set to seconds. So, so make sure that is going to be your master time is set in seconds, and then it will always be at that particular bar and beat position. All right, so you see from Michael Team says, thanks, Greg. Events and parts were not selected. Fixed now. All right, glad it was a one mouse click away from happiness. Gareth is asking how we set up private parts. So what you do is you just kind of come over here and go to visibility and hide them. So that way no one sees it. That's how you can make parts private. So Gareth always makes me laugh. All right. Great to see you on, Gareth, from Bilbao, Spain. All right. Gareth is saying devices can be divisive. All right. All right, we see Raw Justice Hip Hop checking in from Capitol Heights. So thanks. All right, so we see from Yanko. Let me just find it. My chat field jumped. Says, I tried to create patches with the MSB LSB PC for my external synthesizers. I went to select them by name in the inspector. I do. Device manager, new device, define new, give name, multi-channel open device, patches, create new bank, right click, add multiple presets, add new MIDI track, output new device. Now in the inspector track, I still see in outing tab fields LSB and PC, but not patched from where I can see external synthesizer patches by name. It's for all my synths. Example peak, mind, UB637, Hydrosynth, any device. Sorry for my problematic explanation. I'm German, so sorry for my problematic understanding. I'm American. So, I would, there's, most people I know end up doing kind of the patch scripts. So are you, have you opened up the text files? Because when you go to, it sounds like there's maybe, MSB, LSB could be different on every different device depending upon, on the configuration of the particular synthesizer. So, 3 synthesizers may all be completely different, whether they need MSB, LSB, or they just do program changes depending on the instrument. If you have kind of a quick, like the text for a patch script, most people I know when they're doing patch scripts, and I haven't done one in maybe a decade, you tend to, just copy and paste into Excel, and that tends to, and then export it as a text file that will automatically increment, and then save that text file and copy it over. But if you have a particular script that you want to send to me, I'd be happy to take a look at it, and you could send it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. So, most people tend to do it in a word processor or a spreadsheet, and that way you could, but again, you have to know what the MIDI implementation chart is, and it's going to be different for every synthesizer, however the synthesizer is set up, with their bank and program change information. All right. And you could also check to see if, like HydroSynth, if they already have patch scripts that are available. A lot of times people will make them and share them. All right, so we see Swarup Mandal just says, I want to use all knobs doing fixed things. I don't have any fader to control for contact instruments, expression, and vibrato and all. I want fixed my 3 knobs to control those MIDI CC. Yeah, so unless if you want the MIDI CCs just to, transmit, you could do that. Also, you could assign quick controls. So let's say I want to come over to Retrolog here. All right, and so I have my quick controls here. So within the particular instruments, if you see like this little QC assignment, then we could actually just route particular quick control messages to parameters, and we could click on learn. So anytime that I open up this instrument, I could say, okay, I want to click this knob, and this is going to control my cutoff. So now when I come over, we could just have that knob automatically control different parameters that we could assign here. So every time that this plugin is open, if you're using the MIDI remote, all you have to do is, when that track is selected with the focus quick controls, then that would automatically control the parameters on that particular track that you define. So if I have Retrolog open and I move the quick controls, I could see that, and this is the active window, I move knob 3, I move knob, 1, I could just come over here and control these parameters. But if I had a plugin open with the focus quick controls, so let's say I had an insert and I wanted to come to my black valve compressor. As soon as the black valve compressor is the active, those same knobs are controlling different parameters here. So this is the active window, so this is controlling this. And now with focus quick controls, I could jump over here and control the synthesizer. So I could just come right over here, I make this active, and those knobs are my controllers. So if you wanted to just do straight MIDI CC, you don't have to use the MIDI remote. So if you're writing in modulation, you're writing in volume control, all those things can just be captured as normal MIDI data. When you want that to control specific parameters, if you wanted that knob to always control a parameter on an instrument, or that fader to always control this parameter, you could assign that to the focus quick controls. Allow us to quickly switch so that when we're have a particular plugin that's active, that we're controlling those parameters in the active plugin. So I click on a compressor, I'm controlling that. I click on Retrolog, I'm controlling that. So, but if you always want, this particular fader to control this parameter, I could just say MIDI remote, pick up for MIDI remote mapping. And as I come over here, we could just say, okay, this I want to control, my nano control. I move this fader, and I always want it to control that knob. So if this plugin isn't open or closed, that will always control that. So figure out if you want, focus quick controls in the MIDI remote will allow you to, I'm in contact, I'm in, Retrolog, I'm in black valve, I'm in the multiband compressor. So whatever is active, those controls are working on the active window. If you don't want the window to be active, you could just right click and assign it, if you have the MIDI remote, and just assign it to a particular function that's always fixed, regardless of if the window is visible or not. So Hopefully that helps a little bit. All right, so all right, Gareth is saying Cubase can literally do anything. All right. All right, so we see Drowsy Eternal asks, how many RAMs do you suggest in order to run Cubase 14 with high processing power? Always get as much RAM as you can afford. You know, if you're trying to do 16, realize that your operating system sometimes is taking, you know, it could be taking half of that. The computer I'm using for the live stream is currently at 64 gigabytes of RAM. My personal PC that I use for my home studio, I have 128 gigs, and I bought it so that I could, you know, and I started at 64 gigs and got 2 sticks of 32 gigs, and then, you know, waited a couple months, saved some money, and then, you know, got another 64 gigs, so I have 128 gigs of RAM. But there's lots of people, you know, if you're doing a lot of, you know, virtual orchestration where you're dealing with large sample libraries, that's where RAM can really be beneficial. And kind of just processing all those samples, you know, when you have tens of thousands of orchestral samples, you know, loading up, you know, that's when RAM can be beneficial. A lot of people run 16 gigs. I would recommend 32, you know, but if you have, you know, I have friends that run 384 gigs of RAM, and, you know, they don't have as many complaints. It just gives you more buffer. So maybe other people could comment on how much RAM that they're using. All right. So Gareth is saying 64 gigs is good. Jazzy is saying 32 in a PC, 16 gig on a Mac. And with memory on a Mac platform is obviously could be more expensive. So all right, Jazzy Lamel says, greetings, Greg. Is it possible to upgrade to the latest spectral layers from Cubase 14 that it came with I have now? So I think that there's an upgrade path from Spectral Layers Go. Let's take a look. See if my web browser is going to cooperate or not. Try a different browser real quick. And my prices are kind of in US, so maybe different depending where you live. But yeah, I'm pretty sure you can. I'm not sure why it's not showing up. Try one more time. Yeah, my web browser is not liking it, but I think that there is an upgrade path from the Spectralayers 1 or Spectralayers Go. Not sure why my web browsers are misbehaving. Let's see if this one shows up. Maybe site's acting up. Let's see if I can. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's acting up, but I'm pretty sure that there is an upgrade to get a little bit of a discount with the version that comes with. I'll just check on my phone real quick, see if the. Bear with me just a second as I look on my phone. Maybe the website's acting up, but yeah, but check on the like when you go to buy Spectralayers 12, and then you'll probably see like an update. All right, so we see Uno Momento is going to take a break. He's starting to feel worse with his flu, so we hope you're feeling all better for Friday's live stream. Get some rest, and we hope you are feeling better soon. All right, Uno Momento wants people to whack the like button. All right, so we see Richard Willis just says, last question for me, how long until Tahoe testing is done? Realize that there's, a lot of other components that have to be tested as well, like hardware companies as well. But it seems like lots of people are running it successfully. I'll see if I could get maybe a clarification for Friday's live stream. All right, so we see Kept Energy Music's at 192 gigs. Richard Willis is 32 gigs. Jim Purcell's 192 gigs on the Mac. That was a good investment. Michael Teams just says 32 gigs and his PC hasn't failed him. All right. Okay, let me go to a question that was mailed in. All right, so we had one of the questions that was mailed in was how to easily fix MIDI events that are doubled from a MIDI controller. All right, so let's take a look. All right, so at times you may run into a part, and this often happens if you're using a keyboard as a MIDI controller, like a synthesizer that has sounds, and you're in kind of a multi or layered mode. So what you need to do when we see this is, if you have a voice that's on MIDI channels 1 and 2 and you record, and you're like, oh, cool, I just want to erase this note. And then you may go, oh, maybe there's a note underneath. So sometimes you may, I'll just revert this quickly. So sometimes you may notice that, when we look at it, that there is a note on channel 1 and a note that's recorded at the same time on channel 2. So and a good way to see this visually is to use one of the other editors. It's not as popular, it's not as widely used, but it's kind of more of a surgical MIDI editor where we see this. So when we look at this in the list editor, so go to your MIDI menu to list edit, we can see that all of these notes are doubled. One of the notes is on channel 2, one is on channel 1, one is on channel 2, 1. So the MIDI controller, as we record it, transmit it on MIDI channel 1 and MIDI channel 2 at the same time. So if this catches you and you're like, oh, I'm effectively, every time I erase a note, there's another note underneath of it still sounding and playing, or maybe playing a different voice depending on your instrument. How to quickly fix this is we want to come over to our little settings here and make sure that filters is turned on. Okay. So do that, and then what we could do is I'm going to say, okay, I want to keep all the ones that are in MIDI channel 1. So I'm going to select one of the events on MIDI channel 2, and we're going to say in our focus, we're going to say event channels. So now I'm only seeing the notes that are on MIDI channel 2 because we're filtering based on the event channels of the selected event. I'm going to just do a Control or Command A to select all, and then I'm going to just hit delete. I'm going to take my focus off and switch it to no focus, and now we see all of the single notes that are all on MIDI channel 1. So if you run into a scenario like this, go to the list editor, MIDI to list editor. You can select one of the channels that you don't want. Make sure that your filters are enabled. We want to filter based on event channels. Select all, Command or Control plus the letter A, and then delete. Switch our focus back to no focus, and it'll be all set. All right, let's go back to our live questions. All right, so we see from Richard Willis, just as clarification on my last 2 comments and all the ones in between as well. So, all right, we'll see if there's any more questions that kind of sneak in. Let me see if we go back to the see if we get, okay, so now when we come here, let's look at the spectral layers. Now it's working as expected. All right, so let's check out our spectral layers 12, and let's buy the spectral layers. So let's check out, so we want to buy 12. We want to do an update or upgrade. All right, so so it's normally, so if you're upgrading from the Cubase 14, it's going to be $299, whereas if you did just a full version, $349. So that we can save $50 on your spectral layers update. All right. So we see from Richard Willis, kind of a clarification. It says I had an instance of Halian open. I had it set to MIDI channel 1, but only channel 2 is playing. What have I set wrong? All right, so let's take a quick look. So if we have, let's say if we have a Halian set up here. All right, so let's say if I have one voice in channel 1 and we go here, I'll put a different voice in channel 2. Okay, so let's put an etude voice here. Okay, and if you're, so we can see like A1 is MIDI port A, channel 1, MIDI port A. We have 4 different ports, so 64 channels within Halian. And then we could have this as MIDI channel 2. So if we have a sound, let's say, if we drop in MIDI notes here and we play this back. So if this channel is set to channel 1, so once we come over here, we'll see our output channel. So this would play back. So we listen to it now. So we're on channel 1. But if I switch this to channel 2, then it's going to play the etude because this is the channel that's being sent out to. So, but these particular notes, we may have to switch to channel 2 as well, since these are. So now it's playing etude. So, make sure that it's being sent here to the correct MIDI channel as well. All right. All right. So it sounds like you're on Halian Sonic. So I just see the A option wasn't coming up. So let me open up Halian Sonic, which is kind of the player version of Halian. So we'll come over here to Halian Sonic. All right. So similar concepts. I can come over here. I want this sound on channel 1. And if I wanted a different sound on channel 2, so now we could just open up the flux. So again, if I'm playing, I could just say, okay, we're now playing this particular patch. And I'll just make this a little louder so we can hear it easier. All right, because we're on channel 1, I switch this to channel 2. And now we're playing. And we could see kind of what MIDI channels are here. And if I wanted to layer these together, I could put it on both of them on channel 2 since I have channel 2 selected here. And then I could adjust the balance. So, you could have 16 different MIDI channels here, but just make sure that when you go to MIDI that you have that, this channel here is saying we go channel 2, or so that will play back the flux patch, the ashes in the dark. If I switch this to channel 1, then MIDI on this track is going to the ambient gaslight. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Richard. All right, we'll see if we have any more questions that pop in. Thanks for all the great questions that everyone has sent. And if you want to send files in advance, you can send them to me, or questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Otherwise, you will be back on, we do this on Tuesdays and Fridays, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. But we'll see if there's more questions that come in. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. I hope that everyone's learned a new tip or trick. And if you have, make sure that you hit the like button and that you subscribe to the channel so we can continue doing this resource for people. Give it a couple minutes. All right, Jazz Dude sharing where he made special track presets of all MIDI channels on channel 1 for stacking lots of different sounds. All right, Gareth saying cheers for your help, Greg. So you're welcome, Gareth. Hope you're well. I see Gareth sending kind words to Jazz Dude for his vigilance and always helping. All right, Capital Razor, great to see you on. Just says thanks, Greg. So you're welcome. All right, give it another 30 seconds or so. All right, Jim Purcell, thanks for the kind words. Says, sure appreciate the Cubase University. Thanks for your sharing your knowledge and your help. So Bratman Studio says, how was the Zoom? So I think everyone had a good time. We missed having you on, but we're glad that you're having a wonderful vacation in Maui. All right, let's see if there's any other questions. We'll give it another minute or so, see if anything else comes in. All right, so once again, we'll be back on Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Okay, so we see a question come in from Omaria Bosco. It says, third-party samples don't play in the sampler for preview. Also, how do we pitch bend audio? Okay, so any sample can just be loaded into, I'll just take an audio file here. All right, so let me just come over to my file browser. All right, let's get to all right. Just
day after day after a new day.
all right, so we just all right, so it's just an audio file. So I'm just going to right click on it and we'll say create sampler track. And now I'll just come right over here. Let's go ahead and just play. And if I want to do pitch bend, and we can set our pitch bend range here. So let's say, okay, I want to do pitch bend of an octave. So, all right, so it says third-party samples. So any audio file that plays in, so it's not going to load up like samples from, it's from other samplers, but you can in Halian load up lots of third-party libraries, but so you can just simply preview. Says, and also how do we pitch bend audio, like how it's done in Logic Pro X. I'm not sure how it's done in Logic Pro X, but if you want to. So, or if you wanted to take a particular sample, let's say if we had, this sample, we could also just come into our, so let's say if we want to go to direct offline processing, we could come over and just do like a pitch shift, and we could choose like an octave, and we could just auto apply that. So we could just kind of draw in pitch bend. We can set a number of semitones. So here's an octave, so we want to go up and down. So you could do kind of offline pitch process, pitch bend like that as well. So, but let me know if there's a different way or if it's handled differently. We could probably show you some other methods. All right, Jazzy Lamel asks, greetings, Greg. Can you tell me the difference between the current spectral layers? The one that comes with in Cubase 14, is there, spectral layers on the one that comes with Cubase 14? So there's a lot more kind of when we go into spectral layers. One is the included spectral layers is going to just just went in for, in terms of unmixing, is just going to do vocals. But Spectral Layers Pro can break apart drums, so it can do kick, snare, hi-hat, ride, toms, and cymbals, plus guitar, bass, keys, brass, and also separate background vocals. It's going to do more noise. So there's a lot more kind of modules for de-hissing, de-buzzing. So if we want to kind of come over and see kind of more of, so when we double click, we can we'll open up Spectral Layers. So a lot more different modules that come with it, and some more like refined editing and selection tasks. So definitely kind of worth the upgrade to jump up to the full Spectral Layers Pro. All right. See, Michael Team says, thank you for everything, Greg. Always learning something every time. Greg is the Yoda of Cubase. Everybody come back on Friday for more Cubase knowledge. All right, we see John Costigan passing on kind words. All right. All right, so Jim Purcell just says, the Cubase Index rocks. Just learned about it today. Wonderful. Thanks, Jazz Dude. So I think, it's Jan that does that. So, but yeah, it's incredibly helpful. And Richard Wells just saying Spectral Layers Pro does a lot almost. Richard Wells says that 3.5 hours has flown by. So it'll be longer when I'm doing the index later tonight, but I'll have to help my son with some homework, grab some dinner, and start working on the index. But glad it flew by for you. Hope you learned some new tips and tricks. We'll give it another minute, see if anything else or questions come in. If not, we'll go wrap up a little bit early. Okay, so we see Omario Bosco just says, want to commend the team for their efforts. I first used Cubase innuendo. Maybe at the early versions, I must say that the updates for the latest are a game changer and commenting from Uganda. So kudos. So I'll make sure to pass that along to the team. And thanks for joining us, Omaria. All right, so it looks like we are out of questions. We'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. I hope everyone's learned a new tip or trick. It's great to have people back from vacation, so great to have you back on, Rick. Look forward to hearing about your Maui trip on the next, at the end of the month, the Zoom social. And with that, we will, thanks again for all the great questions. Always feel privileged to be part of the community. I really appreciate everyone for all of their efforts in making this such a great place to learn about Steinberg products. I want everyone to stay safe and healthy, and we'll see everyone back on Friday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up, and we'll see you back on Friday. Goodbye.